Reddit, what's your coworker meltdown story?
Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started.
Story 1. Pizza Hut manager asked one of the drivers to put on his uniform shirt. Driver flipped out and tried to set his shirt on fire in the lobby while screaming about oppression. Then he took off for some reason and drove to the airport, where he jumped the fence leading to the tarmac. Got roughly arrested by the airport cops. We never saw him again. Turned out he had drank a bunch of Robitussin. Story 2. A guy just went batshit at one point when a manager spoke to him for taking time off of the phone after a hard call. This is in a telemarketing company. The dude lost his shoot, screamed out the manager, and left. Then he went on a popular forum and spilled all the company bullshit. We had press and crap trying to ask us questions. Edit. Fudge it. Here's the news story. Story 3. A manager that wasn't really my manager. When his bosses were gone, he would take 1 2-hour lunches on the clock. We were allowed a 30-minute lunch off the clock. He would sit in the management office and eat a little, read the paper, just basically not working while the store got busy. It was fairly well known by the lower workers he did this. We just didn't say anything. One day, a manager of equal power from a different department confronted him about it while he had been on lunch for over an hour. He picked up his sandwich and threw it at her, yelling about why doesn't he get to take his lunch in peace like everyone else. Basically just went on this rant of irrelevant stuff, then just stopped and went back to reading the paper. He was fired by the end of the day. Edit. Wow. Highest rated comment to date. Nice. Story 4. Waiting tables. He goes in the bathroom and doesn't come out for an hour. I took all of the tables for the section while he was gone. When he comes out, very clearly on some type of substances, he is angry I stole tips from him by not waiting for him to get back before I seated people. He cusses as he walks out. Came back a week later demanding the tips from the tables that he should have waited on. Story 5. I was working in a fast food kitchen, and we hired this shifty-looking guy in his 50s named Chicago. His first day, he started complaining because we kept him on only one task because he was new and still slow. Before we know it, he was yelling, "Y'all just don't want me to shine. Y'all just scared." Then he just walked out muttering that this place was too dirty to work in. We had just opened, so the place was in no way dirty. Story 6. Woman kept taking off and coming in late. She was about 50. Eventually, the boss called her in and asked, "What is going on?" The woman just loses it, saying it's none of their business. Boss tells her that they will have to let her go if she misses one more day or is late again this year, as she missed 15 days unscheduled, used her sick time and vacation days, and was late every day by up to an hour, and it was only April. And they will be docking her for those hours she wasn't here or left early. Woman starts screaming, "You don't have that right. You can't take my money. Fudge you, just fudge you." Eventually, she pulled the mat on top of the desk of sending papers and the computer to the floor. Boss booked it and locked her in the room where she continued to kick holes in the drywall and break everything in sight. Security comes. They call the police. Police come, go in, and she started throwing stuff at them, screaming, "That's my goddarn fudge money." We were escorted off the floor, and I'm guessing they tased her or something because she was taken out, handcuffed to a wheelchair. Answer. I really wish this was secretly my MIL. My MIL keeps getting jobs, using up all her vacation days, and then quitting when they won't let her take more, even if it's unpaid. She would just give her 2 weeks notice 2 weeks before her scheduled vacation if they won't let her take off. I really doubt my MIL would act this way, but picturing her doing this is hilarious. Story 7. I was doing carpentry work in the ghetto with another carpenter, Old Jim. Some local kids were there cracking wise, being smart-mouthed and just generally hanging around, annoying the hell out of both of us. Old Jim yelled at them a few times. They kept it up. Old Jim got madder. They thought that was even more fun and started walking right up to Old Jim and smart-mouthing him right to his face. Old Jim listened to maybe 2 of them before he'd heard enough. He grabbed the last kid, lifted him up against a wall we were building, grabbed his nail gun, and nailed through the shoulders of the kid's jacket, so the kid was literally hung on the wall, dangling from his jacket. Old Jim got 1 inch from his face and just screamed at the kid for a few minutes, just absolutely red-faced screaming at him. The kid's eyes were huge. He suddenly wasn't the little smarty pants he had been a minute earlier. He was scared to passing. hanging from a wall with a screaming madman right in his face. Old Jim had a meltdown. He kept it up for a full 2 minutes, just screaming an inch away from the kid's face. The kid was near tears. Finally, old Jim had said his piece. He got a pry bar, pulled out the nails, and the kid came down off the wall. That kid's feet hit the ground and he was gone, running for everything he was worth. It seemed like he just sort of instantly vaporized the instant he hit the ground. An hour later, the cops show up. Boys, sorry, but you can't nail kids to a wall. Old Jim had to pay for the kid's jacket. Story 8. I used to work at a bookstore with 2 guys named Sean and Warren. Sean was a real abrasive jerk, loved insulting people and getting under their skin. And as such, a lot of people disliked Sean, but nobody disliked him more than Warren. Warren had some anger management issues, and with the way Sean kept pushing his buttons, it was only a matter of time before Warren snapped. We all knew there was going to be a showdown between them at some point. We did not expect it to happen behind the cash wrap 2 days before Christmas, in front of about 100 customers. I was on the other side of the store when it happened, and by the time I rushed over, the fight had already been broken up. I don't know what Sean said to Warren, but Warren had finally snapped and punched Sean, and it turned into an all-out brawl between the two. Since Warren had thrown the first punch, we told him to go home, and Sean stayed at the cash wrap. I started helping a customer find a book in our computer system when there was another commotion next to me. Warren had taken the combination lock off his locker from in back and was now bashing Sean over the head with it. I had to grab Warren, pull him off, and calm him down, and he finally left. I then just went straight back to helping the customer find the book she wanted, and Sean went in back to calm himself down. Sean wound up quitting because he was afraid he'd get fired. I don't know if he would have. And Warren was fired. Last I'd heard of Warren, he was on trial for attempted takedown after he stabbed an ex-girlfriend's then current boyfriend in the throat with a pen. Story 9. I work at a company with commission salesmen. Due to some market changes, commissions got slashed by a bunch of companies we represent. One of them, a major company for us, decided to announce this via email on a Friday evening, after business hours. A 30-year veteran salesman was out at the bar, saw it, and drowned his sorrows for a few hours. Then, he decided to let the sender know how he really feels about the decision. As you might expect, he replied all and sent his profanity-filled, drunkenly composed rant to every competitor, salesman, and company official. Of course, tied to our company's email, even has our business card as his email signature. Then, he sent a follow-up, letting us know just how little he cares. Monday morning, we called him in, and he just shook his head and let us know he's well aware of why we're here, what he did, and he'll pack his stuff. Story 10. When I was in high school, I was a busser at a kind of fancy steak place. Think Ruth's Chris, but just a tad more casual. Anyway, this one kid who bussed with me was moving out of state and decided to not give a 2 weeks notice. The last day he was able to come in before he moved, he walked up to like 2 or 3 tables and just ripped the nastiest sounding farts I had ever heard. I accidentally walked in the back when the manager was firing him. Manager says, "Why would you do that instead of just telling me you quit?" My buddy responds, "I fudge dislike this place." He then farted again and walked out. It's not so much a meltdown, but it's still pretty amusing. Edit. Fixed a word. Story 11. When I first started working retail, it was for this family-owned grocery store. It was fairly decent-sized and had a ton of loyal customers. I had been working there for 5 months. I was 16 years old, and it was my first job. We had an older lady named Michelle who worked there since it opened like 20 years ago. I had no keys to the register, and there were certain things I could and couldn't do, like refunds. Anyways, Michelle never ran the register. She kept the store stocked because I was better at being the face of the store when people entered and was better at being on the register. I just didn't have keys, so I had to call her up to help. Michelle didn't like that, even though it was one of the reasons she kept her job after customers kept complaining that she was meanie to them. Well, I come in for my shift and right off the bat, I get hit with like 3 returns, someone needing to break 100 bill. I wasn't allowed to do that. And finally, I ran out of 1s, 5s, and 10s. So I needed Michelle to come up and help me. Michelle stormed around the counter, threw open the safe where we kept more money, 1s, 5s, 10s, etc., and just threw the tray of money on the counter, where it slid across the counter and landed on the ground, scattering money everywhere for customers to pick up. Luckily, the customers were decent people and handed me all the money in the broken till. I got myself set up and, despite being young, I decided to chastise Michelle because, fudge that childish behavior. All I got out was, "Come on, Michelle," before she pulled the lanyard with the keys around her neck off and chucking them at me with a resounding, "Fudge you." And that was how I got promoted to key holder. Story 12. Temp screamed at boss, not even sure why. Argument ended with her throwing her work badge at him and leaving, saying she let him know tomorrow if she still wanted to work there. Did I mention she was a temp? Security had her banned from the building and desk cleared out within the hour. Story 13. Tina. Tina worked at my first retail job with me. I was 17. She was a catty, spoiled, 50-something woman with a rich husband. Why she bothered to work a shoot retail job? The only reason I can think of is that she was so vindictive and cunty that she needed people to take it out on. Tina once stole 25 boxes of store logo reusable shopping bags because we never put them out, so I figured we weren't going to sell them. Tina did not like our store manager. Anytime her and the store manager walked into the break room while she was there, she would make a point of farting loudly. Tina frequently bitched that she needed a chair when she was on register. She couldn't stand for very long because she'd had a child. Her only child was her 20-year-old son. Tina was once assigned stocking the seasonal decoration aisle. She didn't want to do it and retaliated by spending an 8-hour shift folding and refolding our tiny section of towels. Tina broke one of the toilets by using the plunger to pry the seat off, rather than simply unclick the 2 tabs holding it on to clean it. It got better when the seat finally gave out, through what I can only imagine is a sign that even God didn't want her working there. The seat apparently flew upwards with sufficient force as to knock the tank cover off, causing it to crack in pieces on the floor. The meltdown. About once every 6 months, we'd have a night where we came in after the store closed to rearrange, build shelves or other tasks that would be difficult to do when the store was open. It normally took only an hour or two, which we were paid time half for. Tina naturally disliked these. She'd meanie the entire time, make mean remarks about the manager when she was out of earshot, and just make the night longer for everyone else. This time, right as she said, "Christine, manager, is such a little fudge brat." Guess who was right behind her? LOL. Christine lost her shoot, one of 2 times I ever saw her do so. She let out 8 months of pent-up aggression out in about 30 seconds, finishing up with, "You are done here. For good. Get the hell out of my store." Tina responded, "I mean, you know." All in all, Tina's rampage cost the store around $8,000 in damages. She knocked over several huge shelves, knocked our cash registers off the counter, destroying everything except the drawers, and threw a planter through the manager's office window before storming out. Now, the story doesn't end there. See, our registers were very intricately hooked up so that corporate could see every login, transaction, etc. All of the wires were ripped out during Tina's rampage, and not 10 seconds after she bailed, our phone was ringing, and some suit down at HQ in Dallas was asking why in the fudge our entire store just went offline. Our manager explained the situation in great detail. Corporate asked every employee who was there to fill out an incident report. We turned all of these in, and about a week later, our regional manager comes in with some guy in a suit. The company was paying to hire a lawyer to sue Tina for damages. The company won. I don't know if they ever got their money or not, but for months we joked that our manager should file assault and emotional distress charges against Tina for the farting. Story 14. It wasn't exactly a meltdown, at least not at first. Working in IT for a debt collection agency, and a coworker in our department is tasked with updating a server after hours. He's supposed to stay late Friday and do this. This is our primary database. It runs the whole business. It cannot be down during business hours. I walk into the tense conversation my boss and coworker are having about this, and it's obvious that his hamster is spinning at full speed to get out of it. Eventually, a company-wide email goes out to the effect, "Server will be going down for maintenance Friday at 5 p.m. Everything seems fine. Coworker is fuming about not being respected and is acting in general like a jerk for a couple of days. He's kind of a jerk most days. We really don't pay any mind. Friday rolls around and his office door stays shut all morning. Our boss heads out for lunch at noon, and at 12:15 p.m., we are all simultaneously logged out of the server. My other coworker and I rush to the server room where we find our third coworker, who was tasked with upgrading the server. Upgrading the server. We both stand there, mouths wide open, and can't even begin to find words. I turn, walk out, and call our boss's cell. "Hi, I know you are on lunch, but coworker just started the server upgrade, and the entire company is down. I thought you would like to know before owner or president calls." What? I repeat myself as the president walks in behind me, which I am not aware of. He hears everything, starts to open his mouth to me, realizes I am the messenger, not the problem, turns, walks into the server room, and explodes on our coworker. In the middle of this, our boss comes in, hears the screaming, and realizes he is too late to even attempt damage control. The argument is quickly going nuclear. He's mad. The president is mad. Coworker looks like a kid on Christmas morning. This is where, in the experience, we thought he had gone mad. We were all expecting that to be the moment he had a total meltdown. It's a train wreck. We think we are watching our coworker self-destruct. The non-jerk coworker and I can't look away. And that's when our jerk coworker said, "Well, I thought we were just over-glorified, overpaid clerical workers who had no impact on collections. So I didn't see why my clerical work needed to wait until after hours on Friday, since it didn't have any effect on the business. IT is just overpaid and over-glorified clerical staff," was a comment the owner had made more than once and had gone unchecked on. It was the justification for our pay freezes, our low salaries, lack of overtime, lack of comp time, basically everything going that would have balanced the scales for the extra time we had the entire IT department, spent in various crisis situations. After hours on the weekends, over holidays, coming in when we were supposed to be off, in the middle of the night, and the times we had worked 24 hours in a row just to keep things running. We couldn't help it. We grinned. We all four grinned like crazy idiots. We knew, we understood, we could fault him for it professionally, but personally, we couldn't help ourselves from feeling just a couple inches taller. And that's when I thought the president was going absolutely lose it. Our boss waved us away, told our coworker to just get it finished quickly, and steered the president into his office. The server came back up. The coworker spent hours getting reamed, but managed to keep his job, and we were never called clerical staff again. And we started getting a little bit of comp time and extra pay for those situations where we worked above and beyond. It wasn't much. It certainly wasn't overtime pay, and it still took 2 weeks' notice to use comp time, and it had to be used within a month, but it felt better. Story 15. Well, I had a meltdown at work once. I worked at a very small dog boarding and grooming shop in college. My boss handwrote our schedule and posted it on the wall each week, so I'd take a picture of it with my phone so I'd have it with me. One time she decided, after she had posted the schedule and I had taken my picture, that she wanted me to come in half an hour later that Thursday to do grooming rather than my usual boarding work. She changed it on the schedule but never mentioned it to me, so I came in at the time on the schedule that was in my phone. The receptionist says to me when I come in that I'm scheduled for grooming, not boarding, so I say okay and wait for the first grooming dogs to show up so I can start brushing them and trimming their nails. Well, when the boss arrives 15 minutes later and sees me already there, brushing a dog before my shift starts, she flips out, tells me to put the dog in a kennel, and then walks me around to all the boarding rooms saying things like, "Well, why didn't you clean this?" And this? She accused me of trying to steal money from her by coming in early and forced me to change my clock in time to the time on the schedule. Mind you, an extra half hour is only 4. I point out that she never told me she changed the schedule, so I came in according to the schedule in my phone, but she just yells at me some more. Now this happened at the end of the semester, when projects were due and finals were coming up, so I was already stressed out. Plus, this wasn't the first time she'd treated me like shoot, so I had what I can only describe as an anxiety attack, mental breakdown type thing. I burst into tears. My legs were shaking so bad I could hardly stand, and I kept yelling right back at her, trying to defend myself. She looked rather shocked and backed off a bit. I wanted to quit so bad, but I needed the money for rent and food. So as soon as I calmed down, I went back to working my shift. I did quit later though, after I had found another job, and the majority of the rest of the staff had quit due being sick of the boss's shoot. She verbally abused everyone there. Answer: darn. Sounds Link, my ex-boss. The jerk runs the most popular bakery on town and hired me as a decorator. Dream come true, right? Nah. She had her kids in the back and couldn't manage watching them with her job. We used an old-fashioned time clock. My card got screwed up many times by people who couldn't read. She texted us our schedules. She sent me the wrong schedule twice. I was late and she blew up on me. So I calmly took off my apron at the end of one shift, told her I quit, and walked out. Best day of the job. Story 16. Used to work at Ruby Tuesday, and the newly promoted GM decided to quit by throwing his keys in the deep fryer. Story 17. Where I used to work, a boss had an issue with one of the guys in the warehouse. It all seemed fine. But then in the course of less than a day, they found out. He was stealing merchandise out of the warehouse. To ensure he wouldn't get caught, he would take it to another coworker's house. He was having an affair with that coworker. They'd had intimacy in the warehouse on multiple occasions. Literally, nobody had any idea any of this was happening. Then suddenly, this whole story came out at once. Funnily enough, he got fired, but his accomplice kept her job. She somehow kept working there for another 6 months or so, even with everyone judging the hell out of her. Story 18. I used to work in a very cliquey lab. 8 women in the same room for 40 hours a week with a boss who encouraged gossip. The ages ranged from late 50s to 2 months out of college 21. The 21-year-old had worked there while a student and promoted up to full-time, but never shed the student worker mentality. One of the middle-aged women got fed up with the immaturity and decided to lay down the law that we are coworkers, not friends. Stop interrogating me about my personal life. Young chick could not handle the idea that older coworker did not want to be friends, just respectful colleagues, and had a sobbing meltdown. This whole drama fest was mediated by the boss, and it made for a super awkward time to come back from lunch. Answer. My lab days were full of this kind of drama. The boss was like a hormonal teenage girl, despite being a 60-year-old man. The employees took their cues from him and acted much the same. Door slamming, foot stomping, eye-rolling, gossiping, and all-around middle school behaviors. One of the employees finally clashed too many times with the boss and had enough, so she wrote an email to the boss's colleagues, laying out his childish activities, such as spying, stalking, anonymously threatening, and shoot-talking most of the building's occupants. In the end, it made no difference, so I also left that job and research in general. Story 19. Worked at a wholesale office supply company that had a warehouse op. A guy was hired to pick orders and showed up to start work. Some weirdness ensued, and about the 3D day, someone else comes to report that new guy is hurting himself. He had dropped a box of razor blades, which burst open, and was picking them with his bare hands, cutting his fingers up. Manager lets him go, says it isn't working out. New guy shows up next day for work with his lunch packed and ready to go. Manager sends him home. New guy's mom comes in to plead his case. Still fired. Many months forward, we hear on the news that new guy is arrested for standing in the door of his rather upscale home on Main Street, private pictures, and calling out to the Catholic schoolgirls. While he is in the psych ward, our company gets a visit from the Secret Service asking about new guy. Turns out he had been threatening President Ronald Reagan. I still feel sad when I think about how optimistic he must have felt when he showed up with his lunch ready to have another chance. Story 20. The guy had been here for about a year or so at the time. Everyone had their suspicions as to his substances use. Then one day he proved it. He came in tweaking his jerk off. He was up, then down, happy and sad to the absolute extremes. He thought there was bugs in the keyboard, so he was shaking it out and yelling at it while trying to get all of ours attention. He still works here. Answer. We had kind of the same. Our receptionist was hooked on pain pills and would hide in the bathroom, singing at the top of her lungs, or waiting until mostly everyone left for the day and run around the office, skipping and singing and acting nuts. She'd go off on tangents about energy controlling her in different religions. You couldn't follow her conversations. We put her in rehab, and now she's back and doing much better. Smiley. Story 21. Witnessed a coworker get fired for showing up late. He was really in a bad mood that day. He started yelling at the manager and then kicking the back door. He broke through the door, which was unlocked at the time, then gets to his car, makes a call, then races his engine and pops it into drive. He manages to run over most of the small shrubbery in front of his parking space and get his bumper hung up on a rock, then throws his into reverse and sequels the tires until he gets free of the rock, then starts randomly running over all the landscaping in the entire lot. At this point, most of the co-workers are near the big window in front watching this. One is getting it on his iPhone. He finally peels out into the street, nearly missing a truck. Story 22. I don't know if this counts as a meltdown, but at my previous company, our IT guy used to get naked in the server room. No idea why, he just did. One day, one of the ladies in HR with computer problems walks in there without knocking and finds him naked with a jar of peanut butter. Not sure what he was doing with that. IT guy gets dressed and goes to HR and quits and storms out about an hour later. And for some reason, when he left, the guy left the jar of peanut butter in the server room. Answer. We recently caught a maintenance guy asleep in the server room with headphones on and all the lights off. We had to do a facility search for him because he hadn't been seen or responded to radio calls for over an hour. Policy demands a search in case he's hurt somewhere or dead. He had to be literally shaken awake, was not responsive in any way. Originally thought he had died. Turns out he has some kind of sleep disorder epilepsy thing. Who knew? Story 23. Having worked in telco tech support for a few years at the front line and second levels, many moons ago, I saw a few of these. I wish to preface that none of these people were fired for this, although many of them quit on their own accord shortly afterwards. 1. Coworker was getting exceptionally frustrated at a customer who didn't quite understand the concept of click the OK button. After several attempts at this, he yelled in a fit of anger, "Click the fudge OK button." As I didn't reach the mute button in time, the customer I was on the phone with started laughing and mentioned how it sounded like someone was having a bad day. The mute button was often your friend in coworker meltdown stories in phone tech support. 2. Shortly after I became a second-level agent, a coworker of mine who was particularly high-strung would go from 0 to 100 pretty quickly. Without any warning, he ended up ripping his headset off his head and yelling, "F fuck," as loudly as his lungs and larynx would allow him. The manager who was on duty at the time was a lovely woman emerged from her office just to see this employee smash his headset to pieces. He got the rest of the day off. 3. We had a gentleman working who was doing the graveyard shift. Back at the time this story happened, it was done solo. He had a particularly bad phone call where a customer wasn't able to rent an adult film and was getting upset about it, using language he probably wouldn't have used in a face-to-face encounter. The employee in question hung up the phone, left of the office, having made the quick decision to end his employment, threw his ID in dumpster and went home to sleep. He later remarked that it was the best sleep he ever had. Answer: ah, yes. Call center work. The only job where people can blow up like that in what should be a professional setting and still not get fired because turnover is way too high and management doesn't want to waste the money spent on training. I remember a guy who dealt substances in and out of the office. He would put customers on hold to run outside and do a substances deal. Once grabbed a female coworker and threatened to eliminate her, with multiple employees and a supervisor within earshot. Said substances dealer believed this woman had stolen some substances from him and was insistent that she needed to give them back. Turns out the substances were in the pocket of the jacket that he let her borrow because she mentioned being cold at her desk. Was he arrested, fired, reprimanded, sent home for the day? Nope. Later, he became a lead rep for that line of business, though he did eventually quit. Call centers are ridiculous sometimes. Story 24. I work at a vet hospital, and we had to take x-rays of a dog's tummy because it was having diarrhea and throwing up, so it had to be on its back. It was a decent-sized dog, a breed of pit bull, so it was definitely a two-person job. I grabbed the front legs and my coworker grabbed the back legs, and we tried to keep the animal straight and on its back. The dog then violently projectile shoot on my coworker, covering her in a 6-inch wide line from her chest to her hairline. She absolutely freaked, screaming and swearing and dry heaving and carrying on. Managed to keep the dog still for the x-ray though. We were all crying because we were laughing so hard. She would have done the same if we had been in her place. It was like laughing at a family member and not out of malice. Even she laughed about it later. Days later. Story 25. A guy once screamed to the whole office I was bullying him, and he was reporting me to the Citizens Advice Bureau. I got so many dirty looks, but it turned out he had stopped taking medication for his schizophrenia, and voices had told him I was being nasty. We ended up being really good friends and had a great time working together. Story 26. I saw 2 stonemasons get in a fist fight when I worked construction. I was laying electrical underground pipe, and they were laying block wall. One threw a hammer at the other one and hit him in the head, cracked his eye socket. Cops came and took our statements, and the guy got arrested for assault. Story 27. I was working as a lab assistant under a woman who was pregnant and in the stage where her sense of smell was like a superpower. One of the tests I had to do involved using pure acetic acid, very strong vinegar. She really couldn't handle the smell, so much that she made me and thousands of dollars of lab equipment go outside to run this test while sitting on the concrete step 15 meters or so from the lab. Story 28. I was a manager years ago and one of my duties was to order office supplies for everyone. The receptionist decided that she wouldn't give me her list in time, and so nothing was ordered for her. She finally decided, days after deliveries, that she needed 1,000 envelopes even though she already had 5,000 at her desk. There was a minimum order fee, and her 7-box of envelopes didn't meet it. I told her that I'd add her envelopes to the next order, but she'd have to wait. She flipped her chute. She screamed through the corporate office about what an jerk I was, and that I was trying to oppress her and get her fired by making it impossible for her to do her job. Fast forward to the following morning, I walked into my gated parking garage to see that my car was covered in eggs. There was puke all over my hood, and my windows had been written on with shoe polish. I washed everything off and went in to work late. The receptionist was bragging about how she got me so good and how funny it was that she followed me home, waited for someone to open the access gate, and defaced my car. She was fired immediately. Story 29. I was working at an online store that specialized in DD Warhammer etc. related items. We were super backed up and working late on Christmas Eve, packing items to ship. The goal was to finish that night so we could all spend Christmas with our families. A few people were already on vacation, so it was myself, my good friend Jay, and this kid who I will call Sam. Sam was pretty socially challenged, even for a group of Warhammer players, and was very much so into LARP. Well, I should say into SCA. Think of Ren fairs, but more serious. I was pretty upset at Sam because he arbitrarily decided to leave early and leave us working past midnight. We were having a discussion about LARP, which was one of my hobbies, werewolf, the apocalypse represent, and I asked him about his LARP group. He got pretty heated and began to loudly inform me about how SCA was not LARPing. Maybe it was because I was frustrated at him making us work late, but I decided that this was a perfect time to troll. I wasn't the bully type, and I admit that I do feel bad about badgering him. Well, you play fight with swords, right? As a character? With costumes. Why isn't that a LARP? And so on. Sam knocked over a folding chair and scurried out of the store. I got a pretty good laugh until this chubby, 5'5" neck-bearded kid kicks open the door to the shop wearing a homemade armor bucket helmet, brandishing a wooden stick. Not a LARP. Would you like to get hit in the face by this? He yelled, walking furiously towards me with the stick raised above his head. With a stick? I said, trying to keep my composure. It's a freaking long sword, he said, waving his stick around and knocking over some Warhammer boxes. The stick was then pointed right in my face. I raised my hands above my head, making claws, the werewolf LARP symbol for shifting into a werewolf. Watch out, I'm turning, I yelled, and then emitted a howl while laughing hysterically. The little bastard smacked me with his stick, and Jay pulled me back right before I made a bad life decision. Take your stick and go home, I yelled. It's a sword, he yelled before walking out forever. Answer. When I worked at a kennel, we had a guy come in, early 20s or so, with his cute little dog that bit people. As the receptionist, I'm of course being friendly, and I knew he'd boarded the dog for the weekend because he was going off LARPing. So I'm asking if he had a good time while I'm getting his bill ready, and he said, yeah, there was some big battle, and I asked him if he'd won. He gave me this condescending look and said something along the lines of, it's an ongoing story, you don't win. Fudge off and take your bitey dog with you, dude. I was just trying to be nice. Story 30. This one was sad. I worked at a computer firm in the late 90s, early 2000s. We had a female tech dispatcher who had recently had gastric bypass surgery, allowing her to once again fit into all of her 80s clothes again. We had a tech who was a good-looking guy and flirted with all the ladies, but he was married with 3 small kids and he was an alcoholic. This poor woman had it so bad for this guy. One night, a bunch of us went out for drinks. The tech and the dispatcher got tipsy and left together. Fast forward 1 week later and we find out that he hung himself. Fortunately, he lived, but he had suffered severe brain damage and was pretty messed up. Eventually, his wife left him, and the last I heard was that he was living with the other woman, and she had taken over as his caregiver. Twisted shoot right there. Story 31. Worked at a college bookstore. We had been wearing polo shirts for our uniform, but one day we got new button-ups before we opened. The ladies weren't made to be tucked, but the guys' shirts were. I was the only guy working there at the time. I tucked mine in, but I didn't realize the front of my shirt had gotten caught in my zipper. A new girl on the staff, based on nothing but seeing the front of my shirt in my zipper, decided I was intimacy harassing her. I guess she thought I was trying to flash her or something, but I never said anything or made any physical gesture that could be construed as an intimacy advance. She wrote a note detailing this affront to her dignity and took it to my boss, another woman, in her office. My boss knows me, and she knows it would be unwise for me to start intimacy harassing a coworker when all of my coworkers are women. She comes out and tells me my shirt is caught in my zipper. Mortified, I go to the bathroom to fix it, and I think, outside of me being a bit embarrassed, that's the end of it. At this point, I didn't know about the accusation of intimacy harassment. The girl was very upset that her accusation wasn't taken more seriously. She went to the bathroom for about 2 hours. Luckily, it was a slow day, and comes back and starts cussing out my boss, who proceeds to take her back in her office and talk. Not understanding what the frustration was about at the time, I am very confused. New girl gets fired. As she leaves, she grabs about 4 packages of really shoot pens and sprints out the door. My boss explained the situation to me after she left. Story 32. When I was testing games for 2K, there was a guy in our training sessions who was blatantly sleeping through the instructions. He was immediately shoot-canned and came back into the room and screamed, "See ya later, everyone. I just got fired." He was then escorted out by security after refusing to leave the building. And when he finally left, he sat in his car and rage honked his horn for about 5 minutes before finally peeling out. Story 33. Worked as a ride operator at a theme park. Some guy loaded up a coaster, started it, and decided, "Fudge it, I quit," and simply walked off, leaving the ride running. A quick-thinking operator, who wasn't trained on the ride, ran into the booth and hit the e-stop, which stopped the ride at height. Not the most perfect situation, but better than leaving it running whilst the operator was on his way home. No, really a meltdown, I know. But that was hot news for about a week, till a different operator pissed out a window onto a flower bed. Story 34. I had a manager who only made it 3 months. There were problems, but the final straw happened when she got kicked out of a hotel the night before a pediatric cancer conference. She threw a fit because her cards got declined for the 100 room fees. You know, in case you break something. Had to call her brother on the opposite side of the country who put it on his card. Proceeded to throw a fit in the room. Security told her to keep it down. She then called and complained all the way up to the general manager. He kicked her out. All of this happened starting at about 11 p.m. PST. When she told my coworker the story, she painted herself as the victim, but we pieced it together. People don't just get kicked out of hotels for no reason. Story 35. Many years ago, I worked in a typical office environment. We handled voice data issues for Fortune 500 companies. No, this wasn't a call center. This one guy got handed a rough issue. I'm unsure what it specifically was. He flips out, spikes his phone on the ground, and storms out of the office. On his way out to the lobby, he had pushed the door open so hard, it had caved in the wall opposite the door where the handle was leaving a gaping hole. Hours later, he was discovered by management, passed out from rage in the bushes surrounding the parking lot. He was not suspended, written up, or anything. Story 36. Wasn't my coworker, but in Montreal there are a number of residents and med students that come from Saudi Arabia. Their government pays for them to be trained, but they must then go back home to work once their training is complete. One of the medical fellows got jealous of a Saudi fellow, called up the Saudi embassy, and told him that the Saudi fellow had accepted a staff position in NY. The Saudi fellow's family was rounded up by the army in Saudi Arabia. Took a week of world-renowned surgeons calling every contact they could to get them released. The original fellow got fired and blacklisted. Story 37. Worked with a guy who was severely bipolar, but back in a time when no one really knew what bipolar was. We were in IT and in a situation where a lot of processes that are automated today had to be done manually. One day he sent out a ranty email about how he was the only one maintaining the email spam filter, that it was supposed to be a department job, and he was really mad that it had been left to him. I pointed out to him that I was helping, had done so that morning, and that if he felt like he was going it alone, that I'd start helping more. He just threw a meltdown fit, screaming at me that I was lying, threatening me, and just about threw something at me. Story 38. I worked in a factory on third shift. There was a very douchey guy working one of the industrial ovens. He wore a bandana, had a soul patch, tribal tattoos, shirts with the sleeves ripped off, and owned nothing in the world except a very expensive motorcycle. So we hire this new girl, And apparently that shoot was love potion to her. She was in love with this guy and ignored her work to get near him. She always wore crop tops with boob showing and short shorts. This is a factory, so that is a safety hazard. And she was reprimanded for it, but kept doing it for him. She would leave her job to talk to him and purposefully pick up scrap near him so she could bend over near his workstation all the time. Of course, after a while, she was asked not to come back. She starts crying and screams about how everyone there was mean and unfair to her because we were all jealous of how hot she was. She starts hurling scrap metal at the bosses and gets escorted out. She waits in the parking lot for the rest of the shift, 5 hours, to try to talk to throw herself at douchey guy. He is scared off by the crazy and doesn't want anything to do with it. She starts stalking him at work and at his favorite bar, so he ends up with a restraining order on her. Fun note, we were all making about $8 an hour. That's not enough money to put up with that kind of insane. Story 39. My coworker, let's call him Gacy because that's the vibe, walks out to the coffee pot and has to wash it himself before he can start brewing a fresh pot. He starts screaming, "Is nobody gonna help me clean the fudge coffee pot?" Then he proceeds to sulk off and do his coffee business and sits back down at his desk as if nothing happened. That guy has been and continues to be working there since 1995. He's also threatened to punch his supervisor in the face. Good dude. Story 40. Finally caught this early enough. At my office, about once a month or so, multiple people would come in wearing the same colored outfits. No coordination, no plan, just everyone showing up matching. One guy would make a huge deal out of it. "Oh hey, it must be Blue Shirt DC. What, you didn't get the memo? Her. Then one day a bunch of people had on teal, and he starts again. The person he picked on for not wearing the right color looked at him and commented that it was a beautiful color on him, but the buttons were backwards, and walked away. Jerk locked himself in his office for the day, complained to HR that someone had called him gay, then quit a week later saying he couldn't work with people who thought he was a cross-dresser. There was also a woman who threw a tantrum because often the toilet seats were left up in an office that was 90 male. She quit because all the other women started putting the seat up when we were done. Story 41. My 55-year-old coworker found out that the financial institution she had been saving with for retirement for her whole adult career was bought out, and when she called them to check on the status of her savings, they said that they lost it. She lost her shoot and started crying in the office, screaming at them over the phone and everything. If I'd been saving my whole life for retirement and they lost it, I'd probably react the same way too. Story 42. One employee decided to brave it, just to be daring, and park in the CEO's reserved parking spot, thinking the boss was away on vacation. He knew it was strictly forbidden, but did it anyway. His timing proved wrong. The CEO hadn't started vacation yet. It was fireworks when he got there and found the employee's car parked in his reserved spot. Those fireworks resulted in his being fired and held up as an example of what it means to be employed on an at-will basis. Answer. One of my supervisors liked the closest spot to the door, but with him being a male body part, I took it for my own. He kept parking right behind me. It didn't block traffic, and trying to box me in. My car was small enough, and I parked smart enough. He couldn't ever manage to make it happen. He finally got one of the other supervisors to talk to me, so he was a both male body part and a private area. The other supervisor enjoyed my answer of, why didn't he say something? Story 43. I'll never forget it. I was working at this place called Hops, a brewery-type place with some decent food. This was a promotion happening, and it involved 3-course meal. The dessert was a big part of the meal, and the restaurant had converted the service bar into the area where the desserts were made as they were ordered. They had a girl working the station that night, and it was busy as hell. Granted, it was busy, but once the rush hit, she began to hyperventilate and freaked out, shaking her hands and crying hysterically, saying it was too much and she couldn't handle it. She ended sitting on the floor for 5 minutes and eventually went outside to smoke cigarettes. I was asked to take over everything and finish out the night there. Story 44. Working at an Italian place, one of my coworkers kept asking to be made a server instead of just working the takeout section. After being denied multiple times because he wasn't capable of being a server, he then proceeded to tell the general manager to suck my male body part from the back, then stormed out yelling, "Bertucci's has rats. Bertucci's has rats." Story 45. We were approaching a design review deadline. which means crunch time on top of crunch time. This one guy had been working on a component for 80 hours a week for 4 weeks straight. Come in at 6, leave at 8, continue working at home. For context, he is a stupidly friendly old man. He's always jolly and pleasant, incredibly warm person to be around. Anyways, there had been meetings before the final design review for various small things, and he was the only person to not be invited to those meetings because he wasn't working on any of those things. Turned out that they had made some changes that drastically affected his design. The day before design review, he finds out what's happened in a preview that was emailed out. He goes to the VP's office and screams at him. It's a mid-sized startup, so all the senior management come out too. He flips out on all of them and says, "Go fudge yourselves, I'm going to see my grandson." On his way, he looked at me, gave the biggest grin, waved and said, "Good night," and left for a week. He was too important and knowledgeable to fire. Came back and just continued working like nothing happened. Story 46. Not quite the same blow-ups as others, but back in my museum days, one girl I had supervised was promoted to a position equal to mine, but seemed to think she was now my boss. She didn't particularly like me. As time went by, she was making more and more careless errors I was having to catch and deal with. But when brought up, in meetings or with her directly, she would blame me or others for those errors, while also being sure to bring up anything I did wrong or she thought I'd done wrong. After a while, she started making a ton of mistakes in all aspects of her job. It hit the fan when within the space of a few days, the accountant discovered she hadn't made any deposits in over a month. Part of her job was to drop off deposits regularly from tickets, gift shop sales, etc. Field trips teachers were complaining that she wasn't returning calls. And one day she booked a large group tour with literally only me in to cover it. When I walked in that morning, saw the schedule and flipped out, her first reaction was to blame me for not noticing sooner. Scheduling was squarely her job, and I would delegate tours and other tasks based on her schedule. Kinda back-asswards, I know, but that was the setup at the time. Other colleagues reamed her out for the scheduling incident and for trying to avoid responsibility for it. I'd had it at that point, and finally wrote a long email to our exec director discussing all the errors I and others had to cover for. Unaware at the time that the accountant was also complaining to the ED about the lack of deposits. No, she wasn't stealing them. The deposits were sitting on her desk and she just hadn't been doing it. It also turned out that this girl was smearing me to the ED. So these incidents prompted further investigation, which thankfully cleared things up on my end. Anyway, that basically led to an intervention with the ED and some others from management sitting this girl down and reading her the riot act, where she claimed job burnout for the errors. She was like 23 years old at this point, though we worked in an admittedly stressful environment. She was put on some sort of super probation. Her work was double-checked, the scheduling procedure was rejigged, and she suddenly acted a whole lot nicer to me. A more depressing case from the same workplace was a guy they'd hired as facilities manager. He had Asperger's, now autism, I guess, and was an awesome dude but simply not right for the job. He needed routines and got frustrated quickly, and pretty well his entire job description was, deal with shit that goes wrong. He was skilled enough, but in stress would often snap at coworkers or engage in other inappropriate behavior. It was tough to see. His behavior got worse after a while. The ED was unsympathetic. I didn't particularly like her attitude towards him, though he was problematic, and she eventually canned him. Story 47. Coworker fails to get job finished with allotted material in time. Coworker asks for assistance as material is running out. I start troubleshooting as it runs out, throw up my hands and say it's too late. Coworker cries, goes red-faced, throws tantrum, reports me to supervisor for being insulting. Fudge off, ask for help sooner next time, or don't bother wasting my time. Story 48. When I worked at a theme park, we had one girl who was a problem from the very moment she got there. By the end of her first week, she was already on a lot of shoot lists for the way she talked to people. She was still in high school and had a bit of a princess mentality. She was always bossing people around, including people who had worked there for 10 years. But if anyone asked her to help them, she would say that since they were technically equals, she didn't have to take any direction from them. She got 2 serious write-ups in her first 2 months and made massive ordeals trying to fight them. This was also around the time our yearly survey came out. A part of the survey involved writing a few things the park could improve upon, and she sent in a 6-paragraph essay calling out everybody she disliked. She said that she felt she was working in a hostile work environment and didn't feel safe because everyone was always picking on her. I was technically her superior, and I personally never had a problem with her. She was a good worker whenever she was under my supervision, but I could definitely see how her personality would rub people the wrong way. However, she was one of those employees that needed to be constantly told to put their phones away. Anyway, in our department, you could potentially get soaked by some of the attractions. Once you got to be there a while, you eventually learned the timing and could avoid it most of the time. But there was always a chance of getting hit by a stray burst of water. One day, this girl got hit by one of the splashes. By this point, she should have known how to avoid them, but she disregarded that and was in the area anyway. She was drenched. Her phone happened to be in her pocket when this happened. Not only did her phone not have a case, but it already had a ton of deep cracks in it. Water got in the cracks and basically fried her phone. She made a huge scene, screaming, sobbing, and demanding to see every higher-up from our manager to the CEO. She demanded that the park reimburse her for the phone because it got damaged while she was on the clock. Everybody basically told her that her property was her own responsibility and they wouldn't be paying for it since she probably shouldn't have had it in her pocket in the first place, knowing the risk of potential water damage. Being the 16-year-old princess that she was, she couldn't handle hearing this. She started trashing one of our storage rooms and we had to send her home early. While the department heads were trying to figure out what to do with her, she beat them to the punch and quit over the phone right before her next shift. Her dad harassed the park for a couple weeks about paying for the phone, but they basically blew him off until he stopped calling. She was a mess. Story 49. I have 2 from the same job. A gas station in a small town bordering country roads. First, the assistant manager. I guess she was an ex-meth head. Well, one day she had a paranoia attack and locked herself in the back office, screaming that she knew what we were trying to do and that we would never get her. The cops had to come to break into the room and take her away. Apparently, she had a relapse. We never saw her again. The second was the overnight shift lady. She was bipolar and recently pregnant, so I guess she was pretty on edge. One night, a guy walked into the store, still smoking a cigarette. She told him he couldn't smoke. He ignored her. So she started throwing empty boxes at him from behind the counter and screaming at him that she's pregnant and he's hurting her baby. He starts getting pissed off, still refusing to put out the cigarette. At this point, I should mention that this girl is like 5 feet tall, very tiny petite. So she comes around the counter, grabs the guy by the collar, and starts dragging him towards the door, trying to throw him out. Since she wasn't strong enough though, she was really just slamming him into the door repeatedly. Finally, the guy was freaked out enough to leave, so I guess it worked. She often screamed at customers when they were being male body part, but this was the worst she ever freaked out. We all watched it the next day on the security cameras. Pretty sure our manager was so useless he didn't even fire her. Manager was later fired for being $20K short on inventory. I forgot what a clusterfudge that store was until today. Story 50. So, I was that person. In the span of 2 years, I was forced to switch jobs to a more demanding job with no pay increase. Then other people began quitting, and I was saddled with their tasks. Once again, without a pay increase. I suffer with depression and anxiety. I began to become increasingly depressed and paranoid that I wasn't living up to expectations and that my coworkers, that I loved and thought of as family, were plotting behind my back. They weren't. My husband gets a new job 6 hours away and we are going to move. I'm heading up a new software change and I agree to stay an extra month to help with the transition. The Sunday before he is supposed to move, I snap. I attempted tragic end. I called my boss from the ER and broke the news to her over the phone and told her I wouldn't be coming back after all. After 5 days in the mental ward, we move. My husband takes my keys back into my office for me. I was too ashamed to go inside. After a year away, I finally went into my old office and saw my old coworkers, at least the ones that hadn't quit due to poor upper management. We cried and hugged, and I felt better about it all, but I'm still ashamed of what I did. Answer. Girl, that's nothing to be ashamed of. I suffer from the same issues that you do, diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and I have cracked far sooner than you have. At least you persisted with your work. I just gave up entirely. I have quit, and it's been incredibly embarrassing to deliver the news to my work friends. They've been very sympathetic though, so that's okay. Sly. Story 51. This one's my meltdown. I'm military. This was when I was a private, lowest rank, working for NORAD. Before I start, it's okay to help someone. It's different come around and criticize and tell someone how to do something. And it's something else altogether to treat this person as though they're beneath you. I am working an exercise for some bullshit, and this guy comes around and does the aforementioned things. I snap. I throw my headset on the ground, tell him to shut the fudge up. Don't you ever fudge talk down to me. Get the fudge out of my section and go learn the fudge regs before telling me, who is infinitely better than him at the job, how to do my fudge job. He gets red in the face. The sergeant puts his hand on his shoulder before he gets a chance to respond and leans in and says, "It's probably best you get the fudge out of my section, bud." Sergeant turns to me and says, "Sit the fudge down, get back to work." Post-X debrief, I was brought up by other sections as a positive point for controlling the section, when reality, I felt like a piece of shit for snapping at someone like that, even though they deserved it. It happened one other time, except this time it wasn't to a peer, but to a superior ranked person who came from a completely different section to tell one of my guys how to do his job. I was corporal by then and was helping a newer guy do something uncommon and that he was unfamiliar with, while others from my section gathered around to watch him and learn. It was a relatively interesting situation. This fudge bozo shows up and starts telling my guy exactly what to do and what to say, and he's prompting this guy to perform completely fudge unrelated actions. Imagine you're trying to find the answer to 22 using nothing but Windows, and this one moron tells you to open the magnifier and the character map and the text-to-speech and cluttering your screen with as many useless apps as possible, when I was trying to tell him to just open the calculator. And he's higher ranked, so they're paying attention to what he's saying instead of me, who knew his fudge job. Fudge that. Who the fudge are you? You're not ID, are you? It shows, get the fudge back to weapons before I call your handlers. Handlers, in this context, are the officers of the section he worked for as their non-commissioned meanie. He ratted on me and I was brought to the back so people can't hear you getting reamed out and told to show respect for higher-ranked people. I said I wanted to make sure my guy did his job properly and that some fuckface who doesn't know shit about ID shouldn't be telling my guys how to do their jobs, regardless of rank. Written up for calling him a fuckface in front of the chain of command. Answer. Worst thing, administratively, that ever happened to me. Navy vet. Went to Iraq in 2009. Had a 6-month mortar party. Came back a bit fudge up. Was 5 months pregnant in early 2011 when this incident happened. Dude was an E6 on night watch. I went to go turn in keys to him. E6 douche. Hey, you were deployed in Iraq, right? Me. Yup. E6 douche. What do you think of this? He turned his computer monitor towards me and took out his earphones so I could hear. He was watching videos of U.S. servicemen getting blown up by IEDs and mortars. They were graphic and loud. E6 douche. Doesn't that make you want to go back and eliminate the fudge that did that? I watched 2 people die before the shock wore off and I started yelling. I got written up because he was 1 rank higher. And the E8 who wrote me up asked me if maybe I had overreacted because of pregnancy hormones. It had nothing to do with hormones, and everything to do with him being a sick fudge. Story 52. Got into a knockdown fight with a coworker in the middle of the data center floor for sleeping with his underage sister. Fight ended up with him pulling a knife on the coworker and only didn't stab him because he was restrained by other coworkers. Both were fired. What makes it better is that a year or so later, Mr. Knife was rehired, only to be refired later when it was discovered he was running some restaurant's website on one of our more critical internal servers. Story 53. Not me, but my father had an employee that left one night and returned to the office 30 minutes later, hysterically crying and saying he forgot how to get home. This was his 16th year as an employee, and he lived no further than 25 minutes away. Poor guy was given some time off and never recovered from what happened. We offered him his job back and he said he couldn't handle it. Story 54. Chef Kitchen Lifer here. As anyone who's worked in a busy commercial kitchen will appreciate, some pretty dramatic displays of temper, total burnout, meltdowns aren't unheard of, but I think the most impressive I've seen was a commis chef. Let's call him Jason. We were working in London under an old-school head chef Carlos, who wasn't exactly known for subtlety, quietness, passivity. Actually, he was a complete cunt. A total bully who clearly got a wee boner over the fact he had power over others. A lot of the chefs wound up to a busy service by using a bit of the old Colombian marching dust, wound down by putting the pints away, and or supplementing this with some herbal stress relief. No one more so than Jason. Anyway, longevity. After a concentrated period of bullying and intimidation by Carlos, Jason snapped. He was putting 2 finished dishes on the pass, nicely presented with a simple but different garnish of micro herbs on each one. Jason was coming to the end of a 90-odd hour week, was hungover, stoned as fudge, more than a little coked up, so, quite understandably, he got the garnishes the wrong way round. Chervil on the pork, sage on the lamb instead of vice versa. He was just returning to his section when Carlos noticed what he'd done went fudge ballistic. He walks across the kitchen, grabbed poor Fudge up Jason by the ear, dragged him back to the pass and started to scream. Proper high-pitched Adolf Hitler in full flow scream at him, about an inch from his face, with flecks of chef saliva bouncing off Jason's face. As I saw Jason's eyes glaze over, his body start to tense, shake, I knew shoot was about to go down. Carlos, however, didn't. Too preoccupied by his own perceived omnipotence, he continued beasting Jason, and at one point slapped him, open hand, across the back of his head. In one fluid movement, Jason wriggled free from Carlos's grip, grabbed a heavy ladle from a pot of clarified butter, and smacked Carlos right in the side of the head, knocking him dazed for a second and causing him to sway on his feet. Jay wasn't finished. The mental little bastard grabbed a paring, short-bladed vegetable, knife, and proceeded to bury it up to the hilt in Chef's thigh. Carlos went down. Jason walked to his section, calmly rolled up his knives, bagged him, and walked out. Ambulance cops came and later arrested him at home. The judge took into account provocation and self-defense, and he got away with 6 months, served 4, and got a cushy job in the prison kitchens. I know a lot of people will criticize substances use in the workplace, quite rightly so, unless you're lucky enough to work in an dispensary. But honestly, if you could urine test every chef in your country right now and sack anyone testing positive for controlled substances, ain't gonna be a whole lot of people eating in restaurants tonight, trust me. Of course it was an overreaction, but when all's said done, Carlos deserved a bloody good kicking for his many, many sins, and that fudge mug got everything that was coming to him. Next day, everyone except the kitchen porter upped and left to a new grill restaurant opening down the street, left Carlos at home to nurse his wounds and reflect on the fact he'd provoked the wrong geezer. TLDR, Chef acted like a twat, got perforated for his trouble. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchus. See you soon.